Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're tackling a chapter that many students call a Halawa chapter. Something you think is super easy. But trust me, our environment is packed with concepts that are not only crucial for scoring well, but are also the invisible rules that run our entire planet. You might think you know how nature works, but I promise you, there's some mind-blowing twists and unbreakable laws in here. So, let's get right into it. So, I want you to imagine our world as this grand, epic stage. On this stage, you've got all these different players, every living thing, from a tiny ant to a giant whale. They're all interacting, they're all part of the show. But here's the catch. They all have to follow one single unbreakable rule that governs everything they do. Any guesses what that rule is? Well, stick around, we're about to find out. First things first. Before we can meet the stars of our show, the actors in this grand play of life, we gotta understand the world they live in. We need to get familiar with the stage itself. And in the language of biology, that stage has a name, the ecosystem. So what in the world is an ecosystem? Well, think of a forest. It's not just the deer and the trees, right? It's way more than that. It's the sunlight that's powering the whole thing. It's the water in the soil, the air that they breathe. It's this incredibly complex dance between all the living things and all the non-living things, all happening in one specific place. That's an ecosystem. And you know what? Every single ecosystem, doesn't matter if it's a huge ocean or a tiny puddle, can be broken down into two essential parts. On one side, you've got the biotic components. That's the easy one. Bio means life. So this is all the living stuff, the plants, animals, bacteria, you name it. On the other side, you've got the abiotic components. A means not, so this is all the non-living stuff that makes life possible, like the soil, water, and sunlight. Simple, right?
But here's where it gets interesting. Not all ecosystems are the same. Some, like a forest or a desert, are natural. They've been running on their own, self-sufficient for millions of years. But then you have artificial or man-made ecosystems. Think about a crop field, or even that aquarium in your room. These are completely dependent on us. If a farmer stops tending to his field, it won't last. If you stop feeding your fish, well, you know what happens. They need our constant effort to survive.
All right, so we've got the stage set, we understand what an ecosystem is. Now, it's time to meet the actual cast of characters. In any ecosystem, every single living thing plays one of three main roles. Let's meet them.
Okay, so first up you have the producers. These are the self-starters, the chefs of the ecosystem. They make their own food, usually using sunlight. Think plants. Then you have the consumers. These guys can't make their own food, so they gotta get it by, well, consuming others. And finally, you have the decomposers. These are the unsung heroes, the ultimate cleanup crew.
Now, we hear about producers and consumers all the time. The plants and the animals get all the glory. But let me ask you this. Who are the real bosses of this whole operation? Who's running the show from behind the scenes? It's the decomposers. They are, and I absolutely love this phrase, the original gangsters of the ecosystem. So why the gangster title? Well, think about it. Without them, the entire system would just collapse. When a plant or an animal dies, the decomposers jump into action. They break down all that dead, complex stuff into simple nutrients and return them to the soil. They are the planet's master recyclers. They clean everything up and make sure the producers have the raw materials they need to grow, which keeps the entire cycle of life turning. They're the foundation of everything.
Okay, so we know the stage, we know the players. Now it's time to talk about the rules of a game. And there is one rule that is absolutely unbreakable. It governs how the most important currency in nature, energy, moves through the entire system. Now, to understand this rule, we need to know one key term, trophic level. It sounds a bit technical, but all it really means is an organism's position in a food chain. Basically, it's asking who eats whom. It's your rank in the great cafeteria of life.
Let's look at a super simple food chain to see how this works. At the very bottom, trophic level 1, we have our producer. Let's say it's grass. Then at trophic level 2, we have the primary consumer, an animal that eats the grass, like a deer. And finally, at trophic level 3, we have the secondary consumer, an animal that eats the deer, like a lion. See? It's just a straight line showing where the energy goes. And here it is, the big one, the unbreakable rule I was talking about, the 10% law. This is so important. When that deer eats the grass, it only gets about 10% of the energy that the grass had. So, where did the other 90% go? Well, the grass used it for its own life processes, to grow, to breathe, and a lot of it was just lost as heat. There's this massive energy tax at every single step up the food chain.
This chart really drives the point home. I mean, look at that drop. If our producers, the grass, start with 10,000 units of energy, the deer that eat them only get 1,000 units. And the lions that eat the deer, they're only getting 100 units. It's a massive, massive loss at each step. This is exactly why you don't find food chains that are like 15 levels long. The energy just completely runs out.
But what if something gets into the food chain that doesn't get used up or lost like energy does? What if it just stays and builds up? Well, this is where our story takes a really dangerous turn. It's a plot twist featuring an unwanted guest called biomagnification.
So what is biomagnification? It's what happens when harmful chemicals, stuff that our bodies can't break down, like certain pesticides, get into the environment. They get absorbed by organisms, and because they can't be excreted, they just build up in their tissues. And unlike energy, their concentration doesn't decrease as you go up the food chain. Oh no, it gets much, much worse.
And this is where things get truly scary. Just think about this for a second. Energy flows up the food chain like a pyramid, right? There's a huge base of producers, and it gets smaller and smaller at the top because energy is lost. Well, biomagnification is the complete opposite. It's an inverted pyramid. The toxins become more and more concentrated the higher you go.
Let's look at a shocking real-world example with the pesticide DDT. A tiny plant might absorb a tiny amount, say 2 parts per million. Not too bad, right? But then a small fish comes along and eats thousands of those plants, and the poison builds up in its body to 5 ppm. Then a larger fish eats hundreds of those small fish, and its concentration shoots up to 200 ppm. And who's at the top of this food chain? Us. A human who eats those fish could end up with a terrifying 1,600 ppm of poison in their body. We literally become the final destination for these toxins.
Okay, so we've seen how human actions can cause some serious problems in a local food chain. Now let's zoom out. Let's look at a much bigger story. A story where our actions threaten the entire planet, but also a story of how we, surprisingly, managed to work together to fix it.
High up in our atmosphere, there's this invisible shield called the ozone layer. It's basically our planet's personal sunscreen. It's made of a special kind of oxygen molecule, O3, that's constantly being made by the sun's energy. And its job is simple but absolutely vital. It blocks the most dangerous ultraviolet or UV rays from the sun, protecting every living thing on Earth from what is essentially deadly radiation.
But in the 20th century, we created a massive crisis. We invented these chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. They were super useful in things like refrigerators and aerosol spray cans. But here's the problem. These CFCs drifted up into the stratosphere and started acting like Pac-Man, just gobbling up our ozone molecules and tearing a giant hole in our planet's protective shield. This timeline tells one of the most incredible stories of human history. So in the 1980s, scientists make this terrifying discovery. There's a hole in our planet's sunscreen, and it's our fault. But what happened next is what gives me so much hope. In 1987, almost every country in the world came together and signed something called the Montreal Protocol, agreeing to ban these harmful CFCs. And guess what? It actually worked. Today, that hole in the ozone layer is slowly but surely healing. It's proof of what we can do when we decide to act together. So what's the big lesson here? What's the main takeaway from all of this? It's that our environment, whether it's a small pond or the entire planet, is a system of incredibly delicate balances. Energy flow, nutrient cycles, the chemistry of our atmosphere, it's all connected in ways we're only just beginning to understand. And our actions, whether we see the effects immediately or not, have real, profound consequences.
The story of the ozone layer isn't just a science lesson. It's proof. It's proof that when humanity is faced with a genuine crisis, we are capable of coming together and solving it. And that leaves us with a really powerful, and I think hopeful question for the future. We did it once. Which massive environmental challenge will we unite to conquer next?